everyone. Thank you for coming. And how many of you were listening to Greg at the 9 o'clock? Oh, sorry. Wasn't he marvelous? So you're going to hear me echo so much of what he said because we are very much. So I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm the director of the Skylines Mental Health Clinic at the LGBT Community Center here in Palm Springs. Just starting. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges facing those of us aging with HIV, and then talk about some ideas I have for overcoming those challenges and thriving with aging. So, this will certainly be very familiar to all of you, and I just wanted to go through the challenges very quickly. But I think it's very, very important to remember that, as Greg was talking about, the AIDS epidemic was in many ways like a war for those of us who remember it through the 80s. And just to show our hands, how many people here experienced the AIDS epidemic during the 80s? Yes, okay. Well, as is true for anyone who has gone through a war, there are multiple losses and trauma associated with loss that doesn't happen at a developmentally appropriate time, right? And massive amounts of loss. And some people, not everybody, but some people experience trauma to a severe degree that it meets the diagnostic criteria of post-traumatic stress disorder. But not everybody does. However, most people experience some form of trauma, secondary trauma or a sustained trauma, that is because you're dealing with a traumatic situation over a long period of time. And some people, many people, will experience the psychological effects of that trauma, such as depression, anxiety, sometimes feeling emotionally numb, a lot of anger about just the unfairness and the injustice of it all, survivor's guilt, why me, insomnia, hypervigilance, there's a heightened startle response, substance abuse, low self-esteem, isolation, social withdrawal, all of these things that we've been hearing about for a while. The survivor's guilt is particularly deleterious in terms of eating away at one's health, mental health, because it becomes a rumination inside the brain of, all these people I love died, and I think they were better people than I am, and why am I the one left? And especially on the last one standing, that guilt can just eat away at you, and it can do a lot of damage to your internal landscape and prevent you from thriving. There's a tendency to isolate, as what Greg mentioned. You kind of get gun shy after a while. If every time you've reached out and you've lost an entire social network, it becomes more difficult, and especially as the age is true for everybody, it's more difficult to make friends. And those friends that you've shared a long history with are gone. It's very easy to start isolating. And isolation is a major problem with everybody who's aging. It's particularly difficult when you've experienced so many losses. Of course, we know about the stigma, the whole idea of feeling invisible, and I'm speaking to an audience of all men, and I'm guessing all gay men. And what I know about gay men, having spent most of my personal and professional career living among gay men, because I'm really a gay man in a lesbian community. I know how devastating it can be to age within a gay male culture. And just in general, as we get older, we tend to feel invisible, right? And this is particularly true in our community. And there's the other thing that is challenging, which is that in the early days, there was this tremendous camaraderie of activism But as the decades have gone on, the gay community has shifted its priorities, and it's easy to feel like you've been left behind, that those priorities have now shifted away from HIV and aging and onto other issues. We need to raise our voices, and that's a lot of what I was next door yesterday with the roundtable. That's a lot of what that group is all about, is bringing back the activism that came, the energy that came back from, the days of ACT UP, and we're maybe a little bit older now, but we've still got a lot of juice left in us, and we need to make our voices heard. It's important that we're not lost, right? Some of the socioeconomic challenges. Most people, especially if you were diagnosed back in the 80s or early 90s, didn't expect to live very long and therefore didn't save for retirement. And voila, here we are, retirement age, and not having saved for retirement. Many people had to go on disability at various times and are either on SSI or SSDI, not making a lot of money. There's gaps in work history. It's not easy to find work, and as you get older, it gets even more difficult. And then with those gaps in your work history, it can be very daunting. And some people have had to remain without employment, not because they don't want to work, not because they don't have many skills that they can offer, but because they would lose their health care if they went back to work. And so that's crazy stuff that needs to stop. There's a lack of affordable housing. And, as we lose our logical family, and I'm speaking very specifically to an LGBT plus community when I say that for us, more than for other people who are aging with HIV, there is a likelihood of not having had children, not having had, therefore, grandchildren and extended family to care for us as we age. And so the family of choice has been the primary source of support. But that family of choice, that logical family, is often not much younger, right? And so the support care has been around sort of the same age, and so people start dying as we age. And you lose that logical family. And that is, again, one of the challenges. And long-term care is not available for people with disability, and that means that there's a lot of financial future kind of feelings of precarious in the future. Okay, so, and there are many, many other challenges that I didn't even get into, but I have a presentation that was much longer than this. I only got 10 minutes. So I'm skipping through.
But there will be room for questions.
Yes. So I want to jump right to, so what are some ideas on ways to overcome some of these challenges? And I think that's the most important part. And obviously as a psychologist, I'm going to be wanting to promote good mental health and therapy, because I really truly believe in therapy. And there are some really excellent therapies out there that are evidence-based, and I want you just to know about them. There is trauma-informed therapy. There's lots of research now coming out about the efficacy of specific treatment modalities, and seeking safety is a particular treatment modality that's been very effective. As I said, I direct the clinic at the LGBT Center, the Untitled Health Clinic, and I also have a clinical internship training. So I'm training new early career therapists, both MFTs, LCSWs, and pre- and postdoctoral psychology students. And I am training them in these evidence-based models as we look at the research. And I can tell you anecdotally that the LGBT community is doing very well with these particular modalities, okay, in terms of processing trauma. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is MBSR. That was founded by John Kabat-Zinn, and what he did is take principles from Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and integrate them with Western stress management techniques, and it's a really lovely approach to moving from not doing well to thriving. The other is CBT, that stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, that's my specialty. And the basis of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy is examining the thoughts, the self-talk, the internal narrative that you tell yourself, and identifying the faulty thinking that exacerbates a particular emotional state. So we can make our physical health much worse if we have a preponderance of negative thoughts that are somewhat distorted. So identifying them, being able to sort of catch them, and by the way, we all do this. We all have thoughts that are erroneous or faulty, or what I like to say, simply not useful. And we can learn to change the way we think. And when we do that, we create a new internal narrative that changes our experience in the world. And that can improve the quality of life dramatically. So that's what that's about. EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And that was founded by Francine Shapiro. And originally, she did this work with veterans, and veterans who were making a clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was very, very effective. And now we know that it works across the spectrum over many, many different kinds of presenting issues, not just veterans, but people who have experienced any kind of trauma. And the thing that's really nice about EMDR is that when there aren't words yet to be able to verbalize, and remember what Greg said, that sometimes it takes a while, like you're in it and you're kind of white-knuckling it, and it's not until like a decade later that you can even like speak about it. And you know, this is particularly true for people who witnessed nightmares and holocausts, right? It becomes very, very difficult to even voice it. Well, EMDR doesn't necessitate you verbalize it. It happens on a neurological level. And so it's an eye movement that kind of flushes out where the trauma has been stuck within the brain. It's fascinating. So for people who have a very difficult time being able to speak about their past trauma, EMDR has been shown to be particularly effective. And then pain management techniques are very, very important because aging with HIV means that you may have multiple chronic pain issues, neuropathy, and other side effects from long-term use of medication. And aging does bring with it some chronic pain for many people. And being able to have therapy that helps you control the pain, along, of course, with medication, can be very, very helpful. And I think, and this is my plug for therapy, is that as we learn more and more about the dangers of opiates, especially among older adults, being able to utilize these pain management techniques can really make a huge difference in the quality of life. And wrap it up. Oh my God. No. Okay. Well, no, it's not you yet. So, I'm going to take a few minutes at this time. Okay. So, but the next thing I want to get is peer support. So this is just a shout out to all of the wonderful social support groups that we have available here in Palm Springs. And I encourage you to avail yourself with them because they're incredibly therapeutic. Let's Kick Ass. Social groups, events that happen at the center, the retreat that Greg does, and all of those social events and peer support activities are healing, and that's how you thrive. When you engage in those type of activities, especially in conjunction with therapy, you move yourself from drowning in all of the and being overwhelmed by all the challenges to feeling like you're thriving. Okay. Did I miss something? Oh, God. I'm passing through all of this Okay, because I have to get to this. How many people? Okay. How many people in this room are familiar with the Blue Zone research? One person. Do you know when I started doing this several years ago, there was nobody. At least there's now one person. Well, everybody in this room is going to know about the Blue Zone research. So I love this research, and it was started many years ago by Dan Whitner and his team. And what he did is identify the places on the planet that had the most number of healthy, independent centenarians, people age 100 and older, who were living independent, healthy lives. And when he looked on the map, he had a blue pen, and he circled the 4 highest concentrations in the world. And interestingly, those 4 places are Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, in our back door, right? Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. Really different places, different cultures, right? Very disparate in many ways. And he examined a large number, both qualitative and quantitative research of these centenarians, and found there were certain lifestyle common denominators. So the genetics, of course, affect our aging, but that's only 33% of our determinants. So lifestyle has a huge impact on how we age. And these were the lifestyle factors that all the centenarians had. I call them the top 8. All right? Are you ready? Drum roll. Okay. This is it. Exercise, and not just the gym, just the idea that you're moving. I'm trying to keep moving as much as I can. Keep my Fitbit on, right? So keep your body moving. It's the sedentary lifestyle that will kill you, okay? Along with that is having a purpose in life. It's the raison d'etre, right? You have to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And that's extremely important. And having that, whatever that is, whatever your passion is, what Judy Cameron calls true north in the artist's way. Knowing what makes you happy and excited and feeling like you're doing something meaningful on the planet. That is what all the centenarians had. They had a reason to get up in the morning. They also knew the balance between work and rest, right? And as I call this pacing. And this is very important as we age. And it's very difficult to do because we're still operating under this idea, this illusion that we can still get everything done that we want to get done, that we used to be able to get done. But if we operate at that pace, we're going to crash and burn. Right? And people with chronic pain have to learn this as well, right? Pacing is huge. So the centenarians know how to pace themselves. They don't overexert, and they're not workaholics, okay? Eat wisely and eat less. Caloric restriction seems to be correlated with longevity. And eating wisely means eating more vegetables, plant-based foods, less processed foods, less meat. Stay social and engaged with others. We'll hear this over and over and over again. The social connection is so important to psychological well-being and mental health. And if you want to thrive, you must stay socially connected. And I hope everybody do connect today. That's what this is about. The centenarians all had a religious practice or a spiritual practice, not necessarily an organized religion, but they had some kind of spiritual journey they were on. And they were connected to family, however that was defined, not necessarily biological family, but people they had in their inner circle, people that they had some kind of intimate familial connection. Okay, so my summary. Significant challenges present risks that have to be recognized and have to be addressed, and we need to come together both for advocacy and activism, we need to push to get what we need, and we need to also take responsibility for our own health. If we want to thrive, we need to really strengthen our resiliencies, and that requires building social networks to reduce isolation, get the professional help you need to process the traumatic loss, do everything you can to fight against HIV stigma, and mitigate the detrimental health effects of the virus and the medications you're taking through healthy lifestyle. Thank you.
Okay, so we have no Ron, so I'll say. Okay, then I'll stand up. I was going to say I'll stay seated because I don't want to block her. I'm going to say a lot of the same things that she talked about, slightly different perspective. You know, the topic of this was how to thrive, and so the first thing that came to my mind thinking about that is quality of life, right? And so that led me to think of a Greek myth. I don't know who it was. Some goddess fell in love with a mortal man, asked for him to be granted eternal life. They gave her that, but she forgot to ask for eternal youth. So after a few centuries, the gods took pity on him and turned him into a grasshopper. Okay. So we don't get to have eternal youth or life. And then another thing that came to my mind, I was thinking actually about the Declaration of Independence. A right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness. The others are just standing there on their own, but this is something that we pursue. It's not the state that you end up in if you don't do anything. It's a state that you actively have to pursue. You have to make decisions, and some of them are very uncomfortable. For example, an introvert standing in front of a group of people and talking about things like this. That would be me. But you do these things because you know that ultimately you need to do them. And so we have to make social connections, however hard it is for us. We have to get out of our space. We have to find a way to communicate with people. And social networks are great, but they can also be deleterious. And I continue to, I watch a lot, I listen, I go to a lot of events, and it really does seem that face-to-face is the best. And if you can manage that one-on-one, if you can manage that with a small group, that's great. There are a lot of, clubs and agencies that you can, connect through here. And so those are good. It's good to push yourself to do that. Decisions about, of course, getting exercise. The gym here in Palm Springs is also, for a lot of people, doubles as a social venue. So even if you're just going and maybe you walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes, or maybe you do as Jill does and pace back and forth. And this is, of course, what I do when I get home, as I walk back and forth as far as I can, which isn't very far, and pull my hair trying to think about what the next word is going to be and whatever it is that I'm writing. Do we have questions at this point? Yes?
Reducing HIV-related stigma. How can... It just seems like because we have HIV that we have to... how do we do the stigma? Because it seems like other people would have the stigma against us, not the other way around.
But it works both ways. So there's external stigma that all of us grew up with, and especially if you are in some way a minority. For many of us, that's a sexual minority, and so it was invisible, maybe or maybe not. So there's external stigma. That's all the condemnation that you get piled onto throughout your life. That's the stuff that we live in culturally, where a particular white heterosexual with 2 kids and a great job and a house that's paid off, and a car. Is held up as the norm, and I don't think that anybody's doing it maliciously. They're just doing it because that's what they understand, and that's what has dominated our discourse that produces stigma in us. Another aspect of stigma is the internalized one, and the internalized one is very, very powerful. And if Ron were here, he would address this more directly, I know, because I know what we would talk about. But that's very destructive to us. And so the techniques that Jill was talking about, mental health techniques, behavioral health things, these are vital because when people can come to terms with and overcome their internalized stigma, there's a huge leap in their quality of life. And that's really what it's about, is quality of life. People feel better about themselves. They're more able to go out and socialize. They're able to feel productive. It becomes possible for them. A great way to feel productive is volunteering, even if it's in a really small way. We've got people downstairs who are, volunteering, just signing people up for stuff. You can pass out flyers. The smallest thing, it's a responsibility. It's, we like to say giving back to your community, but it's participating in your community. It's being a responsible citizen. And that feels good. People feel better when they're working. This whole business with disability and people who can't work, and you've lost 100 people and the desert itself is isolating. It's a lot. And so volunteering, I recommend, is a great way to get out and reconnect. Whatever your passion is, there is a way. I think that we can't live without passion. I think that we cannot live without purpose. Not really. We might put one foot in front of the other, but we won't want to. We won't get far. And so finding that sometimes comes in funny places where you didn't expect. And so you kind of have to just put yourself out there and see what comes to you and say yes. Ron?
I was going to say volunteering is the best thing I did for myself in the last 4 years. I volunteered at the center and I volunteered at DAP. It's expanded my social group. Some of the people have, besides just the contacts at the center or DAP, I've gone outside of the agency where we're sitting having coffee or lunch. I felt very isolated. This is even before I seroconverted, living in Palm Springs. But the social opportunities and the people that I meet serving in those positions, that has also added to my friendships.
Yes, thank you. And you mentioned something really important. I mean, this is about aging with HIV, but I would like to point out that long-term survivors are not only people with HIV. The organization that I give a lot of time to, Let's Kick Ass, AIDS Survivor Syndrome is what it stands for, and that is a race, gender, HIV status blind organization. None of that matters. What matters is, do you feel like HIV has been a factor in your life? If that resonates with you, then come to our events. Thank you. Dennis.
Yeah, so the social stigma that we experience ourselves just by having experienced or being HIV or AIDS. But I started a shamanic training a couple of months ago, and on the paperwork it said, if you are, it's by signing this paper you agree that you have been tested and are negative for HIV and AIDS.
At a shamanic training?
A shamanic training, that's why I'm bringing this up. And I was like, I took the initiative to say, I can either sign this, or I can say, I can't sign this. So I made the choice to say to them, I can't sign this. The young gentleman's reaction to me was problematic, but he got somebody who was like, oh, this is old stuff. I don't even know why this is in there. I ignored this and it shouldn't be there. So just cross it out, initial it, but this other gentleman had an issue with it. So I've gone through steps to sit down with him, to educate him, and take my own power by saying,
right.
So when you have something like that does come up, you have the opportunity to gain your power.
Well, and part of how you did that was by revealing your own status.
Right.
And that is a way to defuse stigma. When more people say, yeah, this is me, I do this. Yeah. When you put a face to whatever taboo activity, And people are like, well, wait, we know her, and she's a lovely person. It starts bringing the stigma down. I mean, we all know that there's really no point for this. This is bullshit that's basically been created and used politically to divide people from one another. I mean, historically, that's really the roots of stigma. And at this point in time, HIV is entirely a disease of stigma. And arguably, that's history. Ron Stahl has arrived. There was another question.
I was just going to add to the discussion about the stigma. I've been very forward with my HIV. I've been 32 years fighting this since I was 20 years old. And I've been very forward with it to let people know you form that you can survive. And other people are like, oh, no, that's it. No, I'm way beyond that. But you got to put it out there that you can still live. You can still live a productive, wonderful life.
Definitely. Yes. And that's a big deal. I mean, being diagnosed in the mid-late 80s, early 90s, very different. They didn't tell us, oh, you're going to live, you're going to be fine. They gave us the numbers for the suicide hotline. They gave us, if you were in the right kind of town, they gave you the number for the, buyers club. But seriously, they wouldn't look at you, well, actually, your results are positive, here's the suicide hotline. And they're looking everywhere but at you. Somebody was recently telling me that a more, and of course it's about education. This is another big aspect. Beating down stigma is education. The campaign U=U. Does everybody know about that? Yeah. Undetectable equals uninfectious. It has to do with viral suppression. Somebody who's virally suppressed, probably most of the people in this room, actually it's better to have sex with us than the people who think they're negative. Because we aren't the people passing it on, we can't. If your viral load is undetectable, you can't give the virus to somebody else. I mean, I suppose you could probably do a blood transfusion with them, and that might work, but through ordinary sexual intercourse, it's not going to happen. So that's what U=U stands for. It's a vital, really great campaign, helping to break down stigma. The more we talk about it, the faster it will come down. Ron, would you like to talk? Because a lot of the stuff, his research has been about ways that we manage to come through these things and changing the focus of how we look at some of the problems in our lives, things that are challenges that are handed to us. So I'll step aside and let Ron talk.
Do any of you ever had these dreams where you're like, naked in a grocery store and you're just completely unprepared? So what happened was, I was at another meeting, I was asked to be in two places at the same time, and then you're talking right now. And it's like, yeah! And we came up, and of course the slides I was supposed to do weren't on the slide set either, so let me just take a deep breath. So, yeah, and there's water. Okay, good. That's it. So my apologies for coming late. It was a screw up with scheduling. What I'm going to do is take the case to make a case for resiliency. What we've done in terms of promoting gay men's health, what we've done from the very, very beginning of the epidemic was basically, and we're good at this, making lists as public health people, researchers. We're very good at making lists of everything that we do wrong. We have too much sex. We don't take AIDS seriously. We use too many drugs. You've heard it all about 1 million times. And the logic of the intervention programs has been to put basically Band-Aids on all these health disparities that we have as a community and trying to address the disparity. And I'm going to make the case that a smarter way to go for trying to raise levels of health is not to directly address the disparity, but rather to raise levels of resiliencies that protect against the emergence of this health problem. So I will, and that's basically where I'm going. I'm trying to contradict or rethink the deficit-based approach that we've used since the very beginning of the epidemic to address gay men's health and think about what a resiliency frame would look like. Where we first got going with this was in the MACs. We were thinking about looking at substance use trajectories over time. So this is 4 years of data looking at the max. Right. I'll do it with my hands. These are 4 years of data looking at the max. The max is this large cohort study that's been in place since the earliest days of the epidemic. It started in 1983. It's still going. And so we have about 35 years, a third of a century of data on these men who courageously come in every 6 months and giving us lots of data about their health status over time. The idea is by looking at these trajectories over time, you can do a better job of understanding the driving forces of the AIDS epidemic. So these are 4 years of data. What these are basically patterns of stimulant use during really the height of the meth epidemic from fall of 2003 through the spring of 2008. So with these trajectories, there are 4 trajectories we discovered in our analysis. The first is what all the papers are written about, the guys who are using meth every day. There's another group of guys that are going up. And the idea is that they're going up and they're becoming like the guys who, for lack of a better word, we call addicted. There's another group of guys who are quitting on their own. How do I know that they're quitting on their own? There weren't any treatments back then for stimulant drug abuse that worked for gay men or for much of anybody, and there really still aren't. So these guys are doing that on their own. And there's another group of people at the bottom who never touched this stuff, even during the height of an epidemic. What's important is that this red line at the bottom, the guys who never touched this stuff, is about 75% of the cohort. Interesting, right? The guys who were either using the wave or starting to look like the guys who are getting into trouble was about 15% of the cohort, and this other group going down is about 10% of the cohort. So there are thousands of papers now written about substance abuse by gay men, and they focus on the 15% of the sample. So as scientists, we're throwing away 85% of our data. Now let me ask you this. If you were thinking about ways to, which group would you want to study? Which group would you want to interview first? If you were trying to figure out how to set up interventions to lower the use of stimulant use in the gay community. The red one, I kind of agree with that, but I also am inclined to go with the green one. Yeah. Right? So guess what the evidence base is for substance on basically natural recovery of meth addiction among gay men? How many papers are you supposed to have written? We know that thousands have been written about the 15%. They're getting into trouble. Basically, there are none. There are none about the protective value either. And so this is what I mean by the deficit-based approach of looking for things that are getting us into trouble, but ignoring things that are staring us in the face about resiliencies in the community. So the basic idea here is what would happen, what would our interventions look like if we were able to incorporate resiliencies while also thinking about the deficit-based approaches. How would you combine both of these things, and how would you think about moving things forward from a resiliency point of view and designing interventions about them? So what we've done with the MAX is we've written a separate grant on top of it as a substudy, where we're actually looking at not only how guys get into trouble with substance abuse and HIV risk and all that stuff, but the moderating effects of other variables, and we're calling them resiliencies. Noticing that I'm calling these resiliencies, not resilience. If you frame it as resilience, what you end up saying is strong people are strong. The resiliencies are about the ways that men are finding support so that they can be protected against the emergence of these health problems. So we framed it as in terms of the dyads, in terms of interpersonal stuff, like things that we do as individual, things that we do in dyads, our relationships with other people, family building in our own lives, but also our families of origin. So that would be the third, would be like levels of family support and so on like that, and then access to social support and on and on and on. What we've been able to, and Michael Planke will also be presenting data at these meetings showing that our initial analyses of the resiliency model is already showing that it's associated with lower viral load. So the men who are scoring higher on the resiliencies are doing better on achieving undetectable status. So that it looks like that we can start thinking about it, and we will take our analyses further to understand which of these resiliencies are the strongest, and moving towards thinking about how you would do intervention development. Another analysis that we did with the MACs was we looked at life course trajectories of men. So we asked guys what was happening in varying phases of their lives, right? And so we asked like questions about coming out. We used a standard scale developed by Greg Herrick at UC Davis. And it's an internalized homophobia scale. And we basically, using Greg's thing, his scale, were able to show that when men were coming out, 70% of us were being what you could almost call us clinically internalized homophobes. Remember what that felt like coming out? I was a mess. And there were all kind of, like, I didn't want to be around people who were more gay than me and all that kind of stuff. And over time, it turns out, it was a natural part of our coming out, and it was a natural part of our being around people like us and our community. We learned that we're not so bad, and that our internalized homophobia evaporates. So that over the life course, what we were able to show was that coming out, 70% of us were what you might call clinically, internalized homophobes. But as by the time the men were interviewed with, 30 years later in the MACs, it was only about 20% of us. So what do you suppose the health effects were for men who did a better job of resolving their internalized homophobia over time? They were less likely to be depressed, and that makes sense. The definitions of depression is hating yourself. They were less likely to be substance abusers. They had healthier relationships, lower patterns of interpartner violence. And so this whole clustering of these psychosocial health problems that we've called a syndemic, it looks like the resolution of internalized homophobia is a naturally occurring phenomenon in the community that we've all experienced, right? That that we are all doing this naturally, and that is a public health intervention. So what would happen if our interventions, instead of beating ourselves up over internalized homophobia, what would happen if we did campaigns that were about counteracting internalized homophobia and then raising levels of mental health, diminishing depression, diminishing substance abuse, diminishing violence within the community? Doesn't that make more sense? And so there are many naturally occurring phenomena, resiliencies that actually are working in our community that we could take advantage of to raise levels of health that don't demand that we directly fight against substance abuse. The idea here would be to figure out how we can do a better job of resiliencies already existing in our community, taking advantage of those in terms of intervention development. I would say that such things that are very high profile interventions would be things like family building, showing us all how to do a better job of building family, showing us all a better job of making friendships, increased social support, better jobs of resolving internalized homophobia. You guys could probably come up with another 10 of these things that we're all already good at, but some of us aren't as good as the rest of us. And so exploring these skill sets that many of us have, other men who are struggling in those areas, would be the way that we're doing intervention. It would be the way that I would do intervention development. And so these direct attacks on health preparedness probably aren't going to be as effective as going for the resiliency phase. So that's the main idea. We are looking at a long level of resiliencies in the MACs right now. We are in wave 5 of the grant, we will now be reporting data. This meeting actually is the first data this week reported, and Michael Planky's actually going today. So there it is. That's the general idea, and that's what we're going for. And the other thing I have to say is that the scolding tone of the interventions that we've all done. Think about all the safe sex interventions we've been to, and the message is we have too much sex, we're not safe enough, we use too many drugs, we fuck too much, and the good-hearted, well-intentioned people setting these interventions up wonder why the seats are empty. Right? And what, imagine instead if the intervention were about addressing internalized homophobia and learning how to do a better job of being a friend and doing a better job of building community. Which intervention would you go to? Right? And so not only is probably the scolding nature of deficit-based interventions off-putting, and many of us kind of go with our feet and don't come, but they're not effective. And so I would say that we should try to rethink how we're doing these things and build on the naturally occurring resiliencies that already are happening in our community and enhance those as a way of fighting these psychosocial health problems. So that's the gist of what I had to say. Sorry for my major, or my nightmare.
Sorry, the same thing happened to me.
Yeah.
I just suddenly looked up and
yeah, right.
and I just bolted up here. I noticed you were gone.
Yeah, it was like, oh shit.
So if you have any questions for any of us, yes.
You touched on grants. And
yeah.
My concern now is that, especially with our current administration, what's happening with grants? Can you address that, any three of you? And these kind of positive programs that are being introduced, are we at risk of losing money, or what's happening?
When I first started in this business, they were funding 1 out of every 3 grant applications at the NIH. In other words, they were throwing at the National Institutes of Health. So in other words, they were throwing away 2/3 of the science. Right now, the pay-lines, depending on the institute, are closer to 5%. They're throwing away 95% of the science. So in my case, I was able to, be very successful in grant writing, but once the pay lines got below 15%, I was struggling. And now that they're down to 5%, it's kind of like winning the lottery. And the study sections are doing the very best they can to separate the wheat from the chaff. And being on these study sections and reviewing these applications is no fun at all, I can tell you. They stick in a hotel basement in Washington for 2 days with about 50 other people and fighting over which of the 5% that we're going to get the money. So it's not pretty.
And the grant situation for clinical programs, explore grant funding, it's very much the same. In other words, on the federal level, there's very little. There's a little bit more money at the state level, there's more money at the county level. Most of our grant funding has been at the county level or the private foundations.
Well, and that's what I was going to address, is that obviously we live in a community of high philanthropy. Without that, I don't know where to be here.
We wouldn't have the LGBT center would not be able to offer.
And guess what that means for the South, where the epidemic is spinning out of control, particularly among our African American brothers and sisters. And it's scandalous what's going on with the black epidemic, and you have to rely on philanthropy to pay for basic health care needs of populations. The most disadvantaged are going to be the ones who are left in the dust.
And they won't get anything.
It's when people write the history of this epidemic, they're going to be appalled at what happened with the black epidemic in our country, and it's shocking.
Which is another part of my question is, so all of us in this room and at this event are of a certain age, and when we're gone, who's going to carry on this legacy of honoring us?
And how do we make enough noise and people become interested in it, and there will be records left behind, and try to engage as many of the community as possible to get as many people. Each of us has our own social world, and so all of you guys are here. You go out and we talk about this event. Maybe next time you'll even. When we did this 2 years ago, there was about 100 people who were registered. By the time there was over 250. So word does get out there.
And also what I wanted to echo is something that was said yesterday at the roundtable, which is that...
Louder, Joe, please.
I wanted to echo something that was said at the roundtable yesterday, which is that there is another generation, and there are long-term survivors who were acquiring HIV at birth, who are now in their mid-30s, but are young, right? And so that's part of the legacy, that they're the activists of the next generation that will continue to do this work.
And I'm running a training program in LGBT health research at the University of Pittsburgh, and we have a training grant. We're actually paying for people to get their doctorates and postdoc work. So there is another generation coming up. They're good, they're well trained, they're smart as whips. And
That's inspired.
Yeah, and I think they'll do fine, but it's a rough climate out there for funding, no doubt about it.
Okay, I'm going to make us end. I'm sorry. You can ask questions if you want. Well, the next one starts at 11, and we were actually supposed to start 5 minutes ago. We came in 5 minutes late. So I'm sorry. You can find us and ask questions.
That was afterwards. Thank you so much.